Okay.
Okay.
Okay, so Deniz is going to tell you a little bit about our analytics paper. I think you'll find it interesting.
So my name is Deniz Appelbaum. I'm a new fourth year PhD candidate, and this work I'm working on with Professor Vasarhelyi. Professor Kogan is teaching machine learning. Somebody will be taking that class, and he also teaches e-commerce. We're working on this paper exploring what kind of analytics should be used in the external audit. When I say external audit, we're talking about what Professor Vasarhelyi was just talking about. Public auditors are going to publicly traded companies that are listed in the stock market, okay, or publicly traded, have investors or public citizens or mutual funds. And these auditors are there to verify the accuracy of the financial statements that the firms have provided at the end of the year. And like Professor Vasarhelyi said, you have the audit where it's basically the balance statement, it's everything's at the end, year end. And so we have a question of, well, okay, if we have more data, we have firms that are using a lot of data, they're using more qualitative type data, like textual data, big data, do the same types of analytics that they traditionally use in audits, such as ratio analysis, verification of transactions, verification or cross-validation of transactions, simple ratio analysis, and sometimes simple regressions. Is that appropriate for this kind of environment? So that's what we examine in this paper here. And this is also being recognized by the profession in general. All the auditing firms are now saying, well, we have this big data environment, and it's providing deeper insights to our clients. Well, the clients expect more from the audit now. They want more insights on the consulting side, because firms do more than auditing. They also provide assurance services and client consulting services. So what can we provide for them in that environment? But also, we should be able to get more insight and get more deeper analysis of the audit itself. I mean, we shouldn't be relying on superficial, like pass-fail opinions perhaps in the future, because we have more information to work with. We can probably get maybe a more quantitative measure of whether a client is healthy or not. And that's a very risky, I don't know whether firms ever take that on, but it's a potential for future research. And again, like KPMG is saying that this is a possibility for future research with the pass-fail, the audit opinion itself. So in this environment, some of the issues that we're looking at with the current external audit model, which, like we said before, is very similar to the one that the professor talked about, where you have a client evaluation, which is your first stage, or it could be a decision to keep on with the same client. To give you an idea of how important that process is, let's say you're an auditor of some of these fracking companies or oil services company. Are you going to walk into that audit next year and assume that everything's the same? Would you do that? No, because why? Because there's a lot of financial risk facing these companies right now. So you would look at the audit client from a different perspective, a different lens, and say, okay, well, maybe they're going to have a higher risk, and maybe I don't want to take on that client because, if I have to give them a bad audit opinion or a qualified opinion, which means that there's a risk here with the financial statements, or maybe a going concern opinion, which is even worse, and auditors hardly ever give going concern opinions. That's where you say, well, we really doubt this firm can survive during the next year, during this audit period, during the next year. So that's what you have to look at in engagement cycle, and particularly for ongoing clients. Then we have the audit planning, which is based on your assessment of particularly if it's an ongoing client, you have your data from the previous audits you conducted, or if it's a new client, then you have new data that you have to look at their unaudited financial statements, and you're trying to assess the level of risk that you have, and also what you expect from that client. What are you expecting to find? And that's where we have expectation analysis, expectation models. That's where the standards require you to use analytical review processes, which is what we talk about in the paper here. Then we also have combined that with internal controls evaluation, which combined, then we do the substantive testing, the sampling, the examination. And what's interesting about sampling is that sampling was started years ago in the 50s. They discussed quite heavily in auditing back then because the auditing was manual. They had very minuscule, very manually based calculators. There weren't computers back then. They did a lot of manual spreadsheets, and of course, it's very cumbersome to audit everything, right? So sampling became the technique, representative sampling that represents part of the entire financial statement in one small microcosm, in one small slice. And of course, the question is, okay, so if we have millions of transactions, how representative is 25 or 60 samples in this environment? Or do we really even have to do that? But it's still required by the regulators, so that's another cost, to the firms that if they have to duplicate the work, we do something additional besides sampling, then that's an additional expense. So then, of course, we were looking to see what kind of analytical methods we use in the audit to supplement or to enhance the audit in this bigger data environment. So, if we usually do typically like ratio analysis, sampling, transaction tests, is that adequate, or is that enough? Or we could do with big data, we could do more in the current audit environment. And so where in the audit would these be applicable? For example, if we take the same model here, we're not trying to reinvent the wheel overnight, right? We're talking about slow incremental changes in profession, because auditing is very regulation-driven. It's auditors are very conservative, very nervous about taking on additional tasks or new approaches to their work because there's litigation risks, right? Professor Vasarhelyi talked about it. What drives a profession to do certain things in many cases is regulation risks, litigation risks, and some of them are very costly. So where in the audit cycle would you change your analytical methodology? Where would we put it? What kind of methods would we use? And what are for example, we would look at other domains perhaps, see what they're doing with that, beyond not just science, but perhaps business analytics, for example. What are the clients themselves doing? I mean, that's a basic question, right? So, I mean, you don't want to go in doing ratio analysis. The firm is using, belief networks and neural network models and those types of analytics or machine learning techniques, and we're doing something very basic, and we're trying to test, do the audit in that kind of environment. And then the question too would be, with auditing standards, should they be changed to allow these new methods? The auditing standards actually don't prohibit advanced analytics. They have a basic requirement. You have to test different balances and different ratio analyses, but there's no ceiling. So why aren't they doing more than what they're doing now? And we go back to the question of cost, for example. Nowadays, the audit environment is very, very competitive. Everyone's going for the same clients. Actually, many companies are leaving the public sector and going private because of the cost of regulations and the cost of compliance with the SEC, for example, or just the pressures of trying to constantly meet earnings expectations. So, I mean, there's fewer clients out there. And so, a lot of the audit firms, the big four, are starting to lose their clients to the second tier of audit firms. So, there's a lot of pricing pressure in the industry. So the question is, if we have regulations that require certain types of analytics and require sampling, and there's pressure on keeping the cost down by the client, who says, okay, I have all this data and everything's automated, so why should this audit be so cumbersome? Why should it should be done very expeditiously, right? And then also the firms themselves saying, well, we have to keep our costs down. We have to make money also. We can't be doing anything frivolously, right? We can have, as PhD students, we can take our time and play around with numbers and models and have fun, but you don't have that luxury in a job. You have cost pressures, and the partner is on top of you about making sure that the job is done at a certain time, the engagement is complete, and that you felt didn't do anything that's with question cost issues with the regulator. In fact, we were working this last summer with a firm, helping them to design a big data type of training course. And we found out they do have regression, actually automatic regression tools, but they don't use them because they're afraid of the PCAOB not accepting it when they are audited by the PCAOB. Just to let you guys know, PCAOB runs checks, particularly on certain sides of the firms, every year to see how they did in certain audits. So there's always a fear that they're not going to pass these exams and get written up for violations, okay? Or transgressions. And then this is publicly written, actually. It's actually publicly recorded in the PCAOB website about the findings of these examinations. So there's a big risk. And then the other question is, what are the competencies needed by auditors for this? So yes, auditing firms all have specialized units that deal with different analytical approaches and more complex approaches. They have IT specialist teams, for example. But the auditor himself, him or herself, should have a basic knowledge or understanding of how analytics can be applied in engagement. So on our paper, we start first giving a general description of how we could approach looking at analytics in the audit sense. And basically, it's analysis of data underlying financial statements, together with financial or non-financial information, which is very interesting because now, with big data, in the engagement phase, an auditor could go to a client and look at all the big data about that company. Like example, with the fracking companies that are having problems, you probably have not only the financial statements that you have from the past and their unaudited financial statements, but you also have all the information out there on social media about, let's say, that particular company and the issues it's having with exploration or its costs or its layoffs, whatever it is. So you have all this information that gives a lot of potential for different types of analytics beyond just looking at accounting numbers. But like we said, I mean, there are some that are required, like the traditional file interrogation is required, and analytical procedures are required, but they're very basic. And audit data analytics would include, in our proposal, is basically looking at anomalies of data, patterns of data, looking for outliers. Do you have a question?
Yeah.
Yes, okay.
Is there a limit on what the auditor has access to?
Well, it depends on which level of engagement you're at. When you're doing like client planning, particularly if it's a new client, you don't have much access to anything except what you see is the public audited financial statements, your own evaluation of the industry, for example, or what you found. So that's where I would think that big data would be really handy. And I know that firms are looking at using the big data in social media and other qualitative sources of data for other sources of information. But whereas before that was not available as easily.
In other words, like you gave an example of the fracking, so
right.
If there's a risk every year that maybe the company might go under, the company's not really motivated to give any of this data that might help the auditor discover that they might go under.
No, that level, the firm is not giving you the data, giving the auditor the data. Actually, the auditing firm could be looking for the data themselves even.
Oh, so that's what I'm asking. So legally they have access to this data once they're doing the audit?
Well, like some of this is public data, for example. Like if they have a client and a client evaluation data, let's say they decide they're going to go pay for some Twitter data, for example, or pay for some other social media data, or do some web crawling to see just to help expedite internet search for information about that firm. They could do that. They wouldn't need the client. I mean, the client's have to turn that information over, obviously. But yeah.
Thank you.
Does that answer your question?
Yeah.
I mean, but that's in that level. Then once you're internally, you still have your own access to your own sources of data. But this is where the standards are different because I mean I know that there's a big issue about whether you could take, let's say you're a specialist in the oil industry, right, or the mining industry, where it's another problematic area right now, and you have, even if you anonymize the data about those other industries, you can't apply it to the current client, if I'm correct, if I believe, yeah. So there's like big gray area once you're in the client, but I think with the client evaluation stage, you're definitely more open to looking at other sources of data as an auditor.
Yeah, the companies, the firms are not allowed to use data from one client to evaluate another client.
But they could take,
we are trying to change that actually because having a referential would improve a lot analytical review.
Yeah.
And actually the ICPA is committed, it's called Rule 301, mm-hmm. And it never made sense, but when I mentioned this in our meetings, some of the firms oppose that, which I don't know why. I really don't understand it.
Yeah, but they could probably use a generic industry knowledge, like every partner. You have specialists in your audit teams that are specialized in certain industries. So after a while, you have a general sense of the industry, and you can use general publicly available industry data, or publicly available, like social media, a lot of it's publicly available. So the question is whether the firm wants to pull outside sources to analyze the client. But they cannot use industry information from other clients of the same industry, or financial information. So it's sort of a gray, you have to be very careful with that. Yes?
I actually have two questions.
Okay.
So first one is, to what extent can you use these methods to provide, to generate evidence? Is that how,
well, you're required at this audit planning stage here, and also in the, well, he didn't put it down here, but the review, which is after the substantive testing, those are two required phases. You have to do the analytical procedure for those two phases. The question is what level, okay?
Okay.
And that's what we're going to get about next. So, you know, they do lose a lot of the analytical procedure, the substantive testing phase also, but it's not required there. But typically it's been, and you'll see this when we talk about the literature, a lot of it's been very simple: ratio analysis, transaction test, traditional file interrogation, you know, matching, transaction matching, for example, duplicate testing, that kind of stuff. Very basic. But some people do regression still, but there's been a lot of backing away from that because of the litigation issue, particularly after Sarbanes-Oxley. And so we have two different types of audit data analytics here. We can look at exploratory or confirmatory. Exploratory is where you don't really know what you're looking for. You look to say what is going on here with the data. It's a bottom-up type of approach, so you're not trying to assert anything about the data from going into it. Visualization is a huge part of exploratory mode, so it's clustering analysis, but visualization is being touted as like a new, this is like one area where a lot of firms are venturing into right now, is using visualization to help explore the data, to help present it to the clients, to help understand the data and the engagement. Then we have confirmatory mode, which is more on the level in the audit where we've already developed an expectation from the planning stage, okay, and we're going to confirm it with the testing, okay, the subset testing. And that's where we have an expectation of what could happen and what should be happening, and that should be confirmed or not by our findings. And within a certain range, so on the audit, you have the expectation model with a certain range that you accept as a deviation from it, and if that deviation is violated, then you have an issue with that audit. And just to give you an example, some more ADA examples. Again, I mentioned cluster analysis as being exploratory. Text and data mining is also exploratory, so you're just mining the data, the text to see what's there. So firms are starting to use text analysis like that. We have data visualization. Again, these are all familiar to all of you here about different visualization techniques, but they're being used more frequently by firms. Then the confirmatory, again, would be the analytical procedure, the regression analysis, confirming your models. Recalculation is a big one in auditing profession, reperformance. So, you know, you should be able to take all your evidence you've collected and reperform that transaction or that whole area, the whole business cycle, and should have the same result. That's the whole idea behind that. So, that's a very precise expectation model. And then we also have in there the footing extending. So that's basically where you're extending the certain transactions through the different statements. Duplicate detection, where, like for example, original testing, and a lot of fraud work is looking to see whether transactions are duplicated and, you know, discovering why. Maybe they're trying to get in underneath limits, or maybe there's, you know, some kind of fraud going on, or out of range detections and other types of tests. And a lot of those are in like your automated computer tools. But again, like Professor Vasarhelyi mentioned earlier today, we have the economics of the audit is constrained by the regulations. So to answer the question, why aren't we doing more complex analytics? It's the regulations. Okay, so there's a fear that the analytics are not going to provide the assurance that we're used to with manual evidence. So just to bring this forward a little bit, traditionally it's been like paper evidence. So if you have a purchasing cycle, you have, you know, the client sends you a work order or a purchase order, and then you have the bill, then you have the different documents that are checked through the manufacturer of the product, then you have the invoice being generated, then you have the bill of lading on the truck, then you have the invoice being signed by the client, then you have the AR report coming back, and then you have the check for the product from the client. So you have all these paper transactions, all these signatures, all these different levels of transaction were paper verified before. And so the question is, you know, how does that change with the electronic verification? And is that the same kind of evidence testing? So this is where the standards are still not caught up with electronic evidence. So for example, we talk about how three-way matches can be done now with automation instead of manually. So is that the same kind of verification regulations that we had with audit with the manual process? So the standards have to catch up with that. So the new forms of evidence of external and internal data. So if we have evidence of decision making by your client that come from external evidence, how reliable was that evidence? do you think there's higher risk with that particular material decision was made by the client based on, let's say, social media, for example, or sentiment analysis? So how accurate was that information? Would that need new guidance? So these are like issues we're throwing out in our paper about this whole new external evidence, external auditing environment. And another issue is the competencies of auditors. So most accounting classes don't teach much about analytical procedures, particularly even in auditing, you learn mainly about ratio analysis and the sampling. And usually the firm, with the requirements of the CPA exam, it's very hard to fill in additional courses. And most students aren't interested in taking classes unless it fulfills the CPA exam requirement. So this is like it's actually like what comes first, the chicken or the egg. So, you know, hopefully we think the regulators would drive the CPA exam to change, which would drive the education levels to change, the type of classes to change, which would then feed into more of the firms getting the type of accounts they want. Because now, I mean, they're starting to go outside of accounting to hire auditors. And like in this school here, I mean, they've hired many students from the IT department, MIT majors, to go into accounting. Because I think it's easier to train somebody in accounting and auditing than it is to train an accountant or auditor in IT. So that's where the industry is going right now.
Varun Patak just started a job. He did the capstone project with me, and he's just started with Deloitte. And I was in a meeting with EY last week, and they said they have had over 100 people in that for being data analyst, whatever that means.
Yeah.
And it's a shame for us, professors of accounting, that our students cannot do, and they have to go in other fields and hire people.
In fact, like there's more and more reports saying that there's a McKinsey report that I sent Dr. Vasarhelyi not too long ago. During the next 10 years, bookkeepers, audit clerks, that's going to be 95% automated in the next 10 years. So all your entry-level auditors and accountants, those jobs will disappear. And as an auditor, you're going to need to know how to analyze results, because this is all going to happen. All this is going to be automated. All these tests we're talking about, the transaction tests, the verification matches, that's going to be automated. It's going to happen behind the scenes before you even get to the client even. Or it'll be running and you're expected to analyze the results, the visualization, other analytical techniques. So that's, I mean, really you're going to be more of a data scientist, I mean, in my opinion, in the future as an auditor or even as an accountant. Because accountants are working internally with a company, you have the same pressures, except that your goal is a little different. So, I mean, this is like, right now we're at a paradigm change, a paradigm shift in auditing and accounting for the next 10 years. And it's up to us to really be ahead and try to catch up with the businesses and our clients, because they're way ahead of us in terms of their analytical techniques they're using in their departments and their data collection techniques and what they do with the data. So we have to catch up with that. So we started in our third section of the paper. We developed a hypothetical external audit framework. And it's based on, we decided to look at the business analytics domain, which is where our clients, where they habitate. Okay, so we have three oriented. We have a domain, which is basically the area of the area that the audit analytics are pertain. With the orientation or like the outlook of the analytics, we have the technique itself. And since we're not trying to change the wheel or reinvent the wheel right away, we decided to stick with the same audit model, which we've been looking at, the traditional audit model, and see where we would insert different types of analytical techniques as an external auditor. So we're not the internal auditors here, we're the external auditors, so we're the public company auditor. Again, like I said, we have the pre-engagement activities, we have planning, we have compliance testing, substantive testing and review stages are lumped together here, but they're both, like we said, the review, you have to do the analytical procedures, opinion formulation reporting, and then another one which is mentioned in this particular study by Lobicka and Cushing, which has been sort of like the industry standard of all these years, continuous activities, which is very interesting because in that little envelope there, perhaps continuous auditing could fit in. That's something we should look at, like in terms of the external audit model, we could use continuous auditing as part of the continuous activities, where we're looking at interim auditing, because in auditing, when you have a client that you feel really comfortable, I mean, I shouldn't use that word, but when you understand the client, or you feel like you have a good understanding of the client, usually you can use more interim testing that supplements the final testing. So in that regard, maybe the continuous auditing could fit in that particular envelope, but this is what we did for the model here. We've been looking to see how the analytical techniques would fit in here. And just to go over it real quickly, descriptive is basically answering what happened. And that's where most of the analytics in most businesses are. It's basic, very statistical, descriptive statistics, visualization. Predictive is what could happen based on what happened. So it's taking what happened in the past and projecting it to the future. That's where most of the analytical techniques reside. Then we have prescriptive, which is basically taking all those two areas of knowledge and given new data, could we build like different scenarios and give an optimization model of what's the best thing that could happen? And this is a new area of business that very few firms are doing, and business themselves, or clients themselves are doing. IBM has done it with a few clients. And we're proposing that the auditors could be, that's ideal for auditors to say to a client, well, this is what should be happening given the data we have. I mean, these are the scenarios we see for this particular business cycle, and this is what we think should be happening. So this is ideal. Historically, auditing has been basically based on quantitative, statistical, and numeric data because it's numbers. So with the new kind of big data that's social media, that's qualitative, that's not numbers-based, we have more options in terms of what types of analytics to use. So the big data, the new types of data is really going to open up the window in terms of what we can do. So there's no reason why we should be limited to just numbers, right? Particularly when our clients are doing much more than we are with this type of information. But again, like right now, the main objective is to use the numbers to provide assurance of the financial statement. So that it still boils down to that one basic task. And again, we're looking at just an overview of the types of analytical models. We have expectation models, which we talked about already. We're talking about EDA here. Structural techniques, looking for different properties in historical data. Multivariate techniques, which goes through regression techniques. Latent features are very interesting because, particularly in fraud work, I mean, as an auditor, you're more interested in managerial or financial statement fraud, which are very few cases of that exist that you can use to model in what we call a supervised model. Do all of you know what a supervised model is? But that's where you have an example of previous cases of something, or in this case, let's say we have a case of something that's fraudulent versus not fraudulent, and based on that historical information, you can project that onto current scenarios and be able to ascertain whether something looks like it's fraudulent or not. And that's a very simple illustration of it. But if you don't have that, but you're supposed to find the fraud, managerial fraud that's baked into the financial statements, perhaps that's been worked in there very cleverly, how are you going to find that? So that's like the unknown variable, the latent variable that you're trying to use with some models, okay? That's a good area to use it in. Okay, I'm not going to hurry. Okay, this is like our proposed model here. So you can see what we have, we took each phase here, the engagement, the planning phase, substantive compliance testing, review, opinion formulation, reporting, and continuous activities. We mapped it with the orientation here. So each one has the potential of having that same orientation. Then we looked at each types of, and of course some of these, like for example, audit examination is always descriptive, okay? So, I mean, there's some of them go together, but we looked at each one, each type, and proposed what could be used for every phase of the audit cycle. So engagement could be audit examination, all types of unsupervised methods, some supervised methods, regression analysis, and other statistical methods, just to give you an idea. Now we also based our knowledge also on the literature review. This is the part that probably is going to be going into my dissertation. We analyzed 222 papers in the audit literature because we feel that a lot of the forethought, the advancement in auditing occurs in the literature, the academic literature, and many practitioners go into academia and vice versa. So we feel it's a rich area to see what's being done. We analyzed all the literature based on, for example, whether they mentioned external auditing or not, what phase the audit existed, what type of techniques were used. There's a number of different categories. And this is based on the external audit we based on literature. You can see it's a very sparse type of model. This is based on literature review of 222 papers we found to date on what exists in the literature about what kind of techniques have been used to date in the auditing profession.
Can you imagine she read 222 papers?
And categorized. I should show you guys the table. It's like, the table of the papers is summarized. It's like, you know, it's like 100 attributes we had to file every paper on. So it was a lot of work. There's a lot of work I could do with that for my dissertation, right?
You got a dissertation just for that.
Yeah. But Professor you did a paper way back when that had like 400 papers.
A long time ago.
Yeah, maybe more than that, yeah.
And I didn't have PhD students to do it for me.
And this is like a quick chart here of the types of techniques we found in the traditional literature, okay? So you can see there's a lot of them that actually were used. But the problem is that they're used sporadically, not consistently. Maybe like one technique is used once, for example. Like the neural networks is only used once or twice, for example. But of course, ratio analysis is used almost all the time, okay? So there's some techniques that are used very frequently, which makes sense because of the regulations, and others are less so. And this is the number of papers per audit phase. So for example, most of them, because it's about audit analytics, of course you would expect to see most of them in the audit planning phase, substantive testing and review, and very few of the reporting and client engagement phase, which I think are ripe areas for to do research. And how would you use more analytics in the reporting phase, for example? For example, I think there could be some kind of quantitative model that gets a very more precise measurement of a pass-fail as opposed to just a blanket pass-fail. And again, like this is a good idea, the percentage of papers in machine learning or data mining. Most of them, again, were the base, and with the sampling, they used a lot of Bayesian probability models to try and see if they come up with the best sampling methodologies, and also to ascertain like the boundaries, for example.
Let me just make a comment. Ask you a question. You know that your paper being cited is a very important thing. Why? It's evidence that someone is reading it, okay? And in promotion cases, now those are metrics being used to see if your research has impact. Second question, what type of papers get the most citations?
Research.
Huh?
Literature review.
Exactly.
Yeah.
We call it secondary archival. And secondary archival papers get the most quotes because when you're writing a paper, you always see what's in the literature.
Right.
And so you go to the papers that have those sites. So
I use the same technique.
so Deniz is going to be getting cited a lot on this because this is a secondary archival paper.
That's the idea, right? Although I've been told already this part of the paper seems like it's a dissertation, and I've already cut it back quite a bit. Then we also have the traditional audit techniques, and of course, the traditional audit analytics, which are your ratio analysis, your balance test, these are a big area in that particular domain. And this is the number of publications per year. As you can see, there's certain spikes. A lot of audit analytics research was done in the 80s and 90s. There was a recent spike during the last 10 years, but as you can see, it's very sparse early on in the profession. These are the number of publications per paper type. There are obviously peaks, like the behavioral was big in the 90s. Analytical papers were really big in the 80s. For example, that's when they were talking about sampling and different types of expert systems. So you see there's certain trends in literature. And this is the number of papers per journal. Obviously, we have more in the audit journal, which didn't come into play until 1993, I think it was. So before that, there was other journals and other papers that were in the industry.
Deniz, I included in the syllabus yesterday an article by, I think it's Trotman.
Yes,
that
has paper, yeah.
Just came out is still in the pre-publication stage in the AA website, and there's a major survey of studies in the audit literature.
Okay.
But not
this,
oriented
right?
in
Yeah,
this
this is
direction.
strictly analytics. So again, we also do a small little subsection on the sampling because that's been a major area of audit analytics research in the industry. And again, which is interesting is that according to the standards, testing could be 100% of the items, right? Selecting specific specific items, which is sort of like exceptional exceptions, right? Because you're taking all the anomalies from the data and you're trying to prioritize them. But is that representative? I mean, so the standards are still stuck in the idea of the sampling has to be representative of the data, so it can't be unusual. 100% of all audits usually typically thought of being for when you don't have too many transactions. So typically they're not thinking of that as in terms of a 100% continuous auditing, continuous monitoring situation. It's more of an environment where there's fewer transactions, they're easy to track. But again, like I said, the auditing sampling is, in the regulations is thought to be, it has to be representative. So in terms of prescriptive audit analytics and looking forward with this, we have some issues here. It's been shown that it frees up internal auditors, for example, to conduct more analytics, for example, particularly since everything's automated. So there's more room for prescriptive audit analytics in the internal audit side, for example, and it's been shown in some companies that that's what they're doing. The problem with audit methodology right now is it's retroactive. It's taking at the end of the year, like you illustrated there, and looking backward. And so the idea is like prescriptive looking forward. So, I mean, what point would we do the prescriptive analytics? So, I guess we could do that for generating our expectation models of what should be there, but we're still looking at, it's still retroactive audit. So the idea is that audit maybe could be more than just detective, it could be preventative, right? Which we get into the continuous monitoring side too. I mean, so, you know, do external auditors, are we trying to be detective or preventative or both? Or, you know, this is where it gets a little gray, right? Because internal auditors are more preventative and detective. They do both sides, but external auditors did more detective traditionally. And also, the other big overarching concern is that the expected value of adding these additional processes should outweigh the cost of implementing them. So the firms have to develop some type of standardization approach, for example. It's not so simple, right? You just go in there and do it on your own. I mean, there's got to be standards, industry standards, firm standards that would justify how you would, you know, how would you apply these audit analytics. That's why we're looking for guidance from the standards board to see, like, instead of saying, well, it's not precluded, well, we're actually going to encourage the analytics here or there, and maybe they'll actually use our study for that too, we're hoping, right? And this is a good idea of the environment that Professor Vasarhelyi just briefly alluded to earlier. This is the type of situation many clients are, that the auditor goes into. So you have information systems that are connected, and most of them are in the cloud nowadays because of the cost of storage. And there's so much data coming in from different types of parts of the industry. You know, they have, you know, the sales software, they have the supply chain software, they have the billing software, they have all this, the HR software, all this is to be integrated in the cloud. And then they have things from the different, maybe the clients, their employees, the devices, all this stuff is feeding into the corporate information system. And it has to be analyzed. You know, the clients are analyzing with video, they're using text mining, they're using different types of applications. So this is the whole virtual environment of the client, and this is what the auditor has to work with. So then the auditor would, you could take, you know, the auditor could use, like, ideally maybe even phones, for example, personal devices to do auditing, for example. Why wait till the end of the year? And this is an audit ecosystem, which again is in the cloud. And this is more of a monitoring system where you see all the data coming from the client. This is more continual, where there's monitoring, the monitoring system is in place. So you have the corporate databases feeding into it, you have big data feeding into it, all the processes are also feeding into it continually. So this is happening in real time. And all those exception reports, audio exception reports, duplicate testing, manual entry alerts, different types of transaction alerts which have been highlighted as being questionable by the auditors would be highlighted and then examined and run through filters. So this is all happening, like, constantly. That's the whole idea, is that this is a constant audit environment. So these are happening all during that time here with this chart here. These are all slices in there during that yearly period, okay? So instead of waiting at the end of the year. So the questions we have based on our research to date and what we propose about the model is, you know, how appropriate is a method for the particular audit function? So we tried to break it down based on the function here, the different phases of the audit engagement, where certain types would go better than others. Should the assurance services be reorganized, for example? Is there a different way that the audit should be evaluated, for example? Is sampling even relevant anymore? Is there a different type of, maybe they could expand what they consider for sampling to different accepted levels of sampling or different accepted levels of testing. What kind of additional verifications would be appropriate in that case then? And what parts of audit standards and processes have to be abandoned or changed because of the new data environment? So it's, what happened like 50 years ago, it has to be re-examined based on the light of the current business environment, the current business domain, the current audit environment. So these are all, and we're all part of this right now. It's really exciting because you're here at a time when there's a big change in the industry, and as thinkers and academics, we have a big chance now to really exact some change and have an impact, right? So this is very exciting to be part of auditing right now, I think, That's why I was a PAMA student before. I was in a professional accounting MBA program. My first semester, I took a class with Dr. Vasarhelyi, and he got me hooked. He corrupted me, okay?
Actually, pretty much every year or every other year, we had the PA student become a PhD student.
Yeah, it's like after I took this class, the rest of the accounting audit was boring. Because we're in a time of innovation now. It's like business is innovating and data science is innovating, and there's so much new applications for everything. Now I'm going to talk about machine learning and AI this year, right? That's a big topic, right? Well, why not in auditing? Why are we stuck in the same manual audit process? Yes, we propose a model based on those steps there, but that's just a first step. The illustration that we just showed you are more like where it could be, right, down the road. But we have to start someplace, so we decided to work on that model first. But why should we limit ourselves to that model? Why should we limit ourselves to sampling? Why should we limit ourselves to analytical review just in 2 areas? So that's where the standards could come in and say, well, we propose maybe that in an engagement cycle, you can use these analytics and these methodologies, and what's allowable, what's not allowable. That's what we need, I think, at this point in the industry.
Deniz, you should send this question. Send the slides to everyone.
Okay.
Because these might be good ideas for you for your project. I actually was sitting here and writing some ideas for projects for you, and so we'll give you a list.
Yeah. Just to conclude here, basically to reiterate what I was just saying, that big businesses, data analytics are, they've dramatically changed over the last couple of years, but auditing hasn't. But it is now, because the firms have realized, and the firms may be driving the change actually. They're saying, well, we need to catch up with our clients. Our clients are asking for more value-added propositions, more value-added information, more value-added findings from the audit, and you're not providing it. That's what's happening. So the firms are driving the change. They're driving the need for more data-savvy auditors and accountants. So that's where the change will start, I believe. And then the professions now are starting to answer and address this, trying to reduce or change regulations or to modernize the regulations so they can help the auditors and accountants adapt to this new environment. So that's our research to date, and we're working on revising the paper based on different feedback, and then we'll be submitting it soon, right?
Yeah, we are going to actually read this paper, I think the 4th week. That's the plan at this moment. And of course, because this is going to be at that time submitted, we would like comments. So when we get the referees back, we have some more comments from you.
Let's do that soon then,
We don't have time to wait until you get your comments to submit it, but we will give it to you.
Okay. Well, that was our research.
And one of my objectives here is to have, I made a list of analytic technologies that we have at least 1 or 2 papers this semester. That's why I'm changing the syllabus, sticking them in. Okay, so when you finish this course, at least you know what can be done.
Well,
and I have questions like, how do you measure risk? What functions get automated if bookkeeping or auditing gets automated? How should the audit standards change? And some of these questions.
To give you an idea, like on that McKinsey study, the top field being automated in the next 10 years are like machine jobs and welding and stuff like that. Then came accounting and bookkeeping.
That's actually a good study for an MIT student to figure out.
Yeah.
Because that's what's happening. Bookkeeping is very automated these days.
QuickBooks.
Very few people do journal entries today. You have to be a manager, staging in auditing to suggest adjusting entry, and in a company you have to be CFO or at least some high financial level to the year end or the adjusting entry. So
Right.
anyway, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Denise.
Thank you. No more questions?
Now I'm going to cut off because I want a little bit time for. I want them to see what the dissertation proposal
Oh
is.
yeah, I want to see this too.
Okay. Thank you very much, Denise.
You're welcome. Thank you.